A short time ago in a galaxy nearby, a podcast was made to inspire and entertain. Casual Space. Making space available, one story at a time. Your host with grace, Beth Mund.
Hi, Susan. Welcome to Casual Space.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It is so exciting to have you. I have to tell you, so I started with American Fly Girl, and I found it recently and discovered it, and I could not put it down. And then I saw that you have authored other books, and then I had to go get that one. So I'm a huge fan. I'm thrilled to have you. I cannot wait.
Thank you so much. I love to hear that, of course, but I've really been looking forward to this interview. You have a wonderful podcast, and may many people see it because I love what you do.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, so I'm going to take you on a journey real quick and we'll pick it up from there. I'm a young girl. I go to the Smithsonian and I see that poster of the WASPs, those women aviators. And in my world, they're bigger than life and they are representative of the toughness and the ability to overcome. And they just look like such badass women in that poster. You know the one I'm talking about? The famous one?
Yes.
All right. So let's start there because an image sometimes is worth 1,000 words, but your thousands of words in your beautiful book that walk us through the story of one aviator in particular is amazing. How did you come upon the story of Hazel?
Well, I've lived in Portland, Oregon my whole life, and that's where Hazel also grew up. So I had seen pictures of her. There's a beautiful painting of her at the Portland International Airport. You know, I knew she was an aviator in World War II, and that's about it. When I started researching her, the first thing I saw is that picture that's the book cover. And I just instantly, like you're saying about seeing the picture of the photograph of the WASPs, I saw that photograph of Hazel and I was just drawn into her.
Can we talk about this for a minute?
Yes.
I mean, okay, so she's on the flight wing. She's leaning up against probably her plane.
Yes.
She's got the goggles, the aviators, and she's smoking a cigarette with her boots. I mean, the belt, because the pants probably didn't fit. I mean, do you think this was taken? Do we have record? Was this on the Texas Air Base with the short sleeves?
No,
what do you think?
Portland, when she was training here in Portland. So it was very early in her aviation career, and you just see the joy on her face. You know, even the pride at what she's accomplished. She's doing her dream, you know?
Okay, so when you saw her photo and you kind of had an idea of her story, when you started researching, where was the point where you said, I have to put this in a book and write it to share it?
I would say within 24 hours.
What?
Everything unfolded magically, maybe like it was meant to be. And there was an archive at the Texas Women's University in Denton, Texas, that had an archive of all of the WASPs, their letters, their oral histories. There was months, you could take months going through that and sitting and listening to all the WASPs talk about their experiences. But the most valuable for my book, and this is when I knew I had it, was the letters that the WASPs wrote home every day while they were in training, and even after when they were still flying, ferrying aircraft. They wrote home every day to their families. So I had every intricate, I mean, it was just a story right there. I knew what they were eating. I knew what practical jokes Hazel had played on them that day. They all talked about Hazel because she had such a big personality. And of course, there were 6 in a room. So they got very, very close during that training time.
Now, did all of the women who served as WASPs turn over those letters to the museum, or were they given by their families? How did they become in record?
Both. Most of them were given by their families. And there are things scattered in other places. I think the WASP Museum, where I'm going in May, and I'll find out and be able to answer this, I think they have a lot of information there too. But it's pretty known that the WASP archives, WASPs, are in Denton, Texas, and the archivists there have just done an incredible job. And it's all available online. So
I
if
did
you want to
not know. Oh,
WASPs letter
wow.
home, what a fascinating time in our history. And aviation, they talk about what they flew every day. And of course, they ended up flying 78 different aircraft. That's not typical of someone during World War II. And sometimes
Right.
they'd fly a plane they'd never flown before when they started ferrying, and they'd have to look as quickly as they could through the manual, or someone would tell them how to fly it. I mean, it's just hard to imagine for me. Dangerous.
Yes, I know. And I wish I could draw a parallel. I wonder if the Wasps could meet the original Mercury 13, the women who also had to get familiar with, the systems and the different kinds of, rockets, and know oftentimes had to go and learn more and fly further and have more hours and more experience, only to get canceled or not be able to fly. It's not an uncommon story. And that's why Hazel succeeding in the way she did and having so much fun while doing it is such a joy to read. I mean, I got the spirit of Hazel through the book, but how did you get to know her? If you described her, which you did so well in the book, but if we didn't know this story, how did Hazel speak to you?
Well, from the beginning, I related to her, and not just the fact that we had grown up in Portland. Those places where she lived and spent time are all still there. They're very familiar to me. So immediately, I felt like I knew what she had experienced. But her determination and her just her spirit of wanting to make light and funny of things that are very, very difficult, the way she hit barriers head on with humor. She handled so much with humor, and I could kind of relate to that too. I do that to a fault, actually. But
Do you really?
yeah, you can cover a lot with humor. And I think I think Hazel hid a lot of her pain at the discrimination with humor, especially when she was in the WASPs and she was the only Asian American in training. Most of her friends had never met an Asian American person. I mean, one of them lived in a Saudi in North Dakota. She hadn't been exposed to any other ethnicities. And there were things that I'm sure must have not only felt lonely, but hurt her in their ignorance, even though they were well-meaning. And she says that a lot. And I also was able to have her voice in writing, and there are a couple of documentaries about her. And so that really brought her to life. She wrote in dialogue. She wrote like she was writing fiction about her own stories. So it's funny, and she really comes through in that writing. Very,
Yeah.
yeah, my favorite
And
person.
really? Oh, I know. I wish she were here. You feel like she is through your book. And, I felt like I got to know her. I felt like I was walking through some of the hardships and joys with her. I felt her eagerness to fly, and just over and over, like every time I'm turning the chapters, I'm like, when is she going to fly? When is she going to fly? You feel it. And you feel like, okay, so now, oh my gosh, she goes all the way back home to China just to get that chance, only to not have it and have to return to the States, and then almost get demoted and be like, okay, you can fly maybe if you join this program and train in March and clean latrines. And it's just like, oh, you just get you're championing her all along, and then things happen. Let's walk through a few parts, whether they're funny or sad or in between. Her family, let's start there. She comes from a large family. Do you think it was in her family's acumen that taught her this perseverance?
I think indirectly through her mother. Her mother was always trying to slow her down.
Mm.
Stop doing things with boys. She was racing the boys in the street and she won. You're not going to get a husband racing them and winning. You need to let them win. But and so her mother was saying, stop. But her mother had come from China when she was very, very young, the second wife of Hazel's father. Came across the country not speaking a language, the bravery to come here sight unseen, the hope in that. And she was extremely brave and strong. And to raise all of these kids in a very tiny apartment in Chinatown in Portland, that took just an incredible amount of courage. And I do think Hazel had that more than any of her other children.
Yeah, of her siblings. And you can also feel Hazel's love for her siblings too.
Yeah.
It must have been hard for her to leave, but that moment where she kind of discovers flying, I felt right there alongside Hazel, like this was her moment and there was no stopping her. And so relatable. There are many astronauts, many aviators, many women who go to court for whatever reason and say, this is it. I'm going to be a judge or attorney, or they go and they experience nature and they're going to go into that path, or aviator. So how did you find that through her letters or her experiences, that was that moment?
I think a lot of it was in the doing of it, that just the fact of what she did, the actions she had to take. Some of this was written about in our local newspaper, the Oregonian, and she was interviewed about this early flight and how she made it happen. How did she get someone to teach her to fly? And how did she become involved then with the Chinese Flying Club that went to China? So I had that. I had her writing about it. And then even the WASPs wrote about her first flight and how she got into flying. And so I had a lot of different accounts. That was clearly one of the biggest things that happened to her in her life.
Did you get to meet any of the wasps? Are any of them still with us?
I Yes, but not not able to
Okay.
meet someone. The two that were, I don't know actually, were still alive. We're not, their memory was gone. But I have
Yeah.
these videos of those people speaking. I mean, what an incredible gift. And
Yeah.
the people who are doing this, who are doing oral histories and keeping this, it would be lost forever.
Yeah.
So I felt like I did sit with the WASP, and one of them wrote a little self-published book just about Hazel, and she
I
had
saw
sat with
that.
Hazel and talked about her life. It was kind of an accidental thing that happened. They got snowed in together and ended up spending an evening talking. And she got all of this information from Hazel. The other thing was, I have now forgotten about how did I have all of this? Was that the question?
Oh, if you had the privilege of actually speaking with any
Oh,
wasps.
and also some of her family, her niece, which when I first started writing the book, I thought this will be great. They live right here in Portland, and they didn't know anything about Hazel. When Hazel died and her brother died a few days later, the family stopped talking about her. So the nieces and cousins that I have met have read the story, loved the story because they didn't know. So I
I
didn't get a
didn't
lot of help,
know.
but I was,
Wow.
honored to gather everything I did in my research about her.
Yeah. Well, she was such a light. And when that light was tragically and very early extinguished, I can only imagine how painful it was and why a family would choose to not, speak about it, because everyone grieves differently. I wanted to ask you a little bit about I love when I read a book and there are heroes along the way that help
Mhm.
the hero. And I want to talk about that because we are, I think, through history and being that this is such a historical piece, that we already know how difficult it was and how many people, unfortunately, kept Hazel from flying. And it was the circumstance and the culture. And even when she would go into town and they'd be like, "What are you? I'm a female pilot. What are you talking about?" It's just hilarious. Um, but there are people along her journey that you've shared that I really want to mention. And it's some of the men who were pilots who gave her extra hours in the flight, extra, like good job, the things like that that kind of welcomed her. There wasn't everyone against her. Let's talk about Jackie, and let's talk about some of the women who fought not just for the program that enlisted and guided Hazel and the other WASPs. And again, let me make sure that as the audience listens, it's women women aviation
Air
service
Force,
pilots, Air
Women
Force, excuse me.
Airforce Service Pilots.
Thank
Yes.
you. Okay, thank you. So she had, between Jackie and the other woman, I forget her name. Um,
Nancy Love.
yes, and
Yeah.
all of these women who were amazing advocates for Hazel and her colleagues who would help her along the way. Let's talk about those people because they had very similar situations where perhaps their careers were on the line. And Hazel, not only, it's fun, right? Hazel wanted to fly, and that's really all she wanted. And she would do anything to get that opportunity. But Hazel did so much more, just falling in line and being on the military base and helping her fellow colleagues, females, and making room for them and welcoming them and giving them her light. She did so much more than just getting to the end path, which was flying. So let's talk about those other heroes.
Yeah, and also just a little in addition to that is Hazel, at the time, women were flying mostly stunts. They were doing barnstorming, doing races. Hazel wanted to fly fast, and she wanted to fly combat. And that was even more unusual than the women who were being stunt pilots, which was much more common. She wanted to fly combat. And of course, a lot of their fathers said no to that. Hazel's father had died. So that was another opportunity that was presented that she could do. And her mother said, I'm not going to stand in your way. So there were a lot more women who would have liked to have done what Hazel was doing, who were just told by their fathers or husbands, no.
Right. And some women had to choose between a husband and a flying.
Oh, yes, most of them did. Once they married, their husbands said, you're not going to fly anymore. I mean, they weren't necessarily being mean at that time. That was what was expected. And these women, these WASPs, started questioning it because they loved flying so much and they didn't want to stop. And, after the WASPs were disbanded, very few of them ever flew again. And I just think the heartbreak of that. So we were talking about people that helped, like Al Greenwood and Jackie Cochran, who was in charge of the training program of the WASPs. And she interviewed Hazel personally and really might not have taken Hazel on if not for a couple of things. I know Jackie saw herself in Hazel, that scrappy person who didn't come from money, which was unusual in aviation at that time. You had to have money to fly. The Howard Hughes of Amelia Earhart's, they had to have money to fly. So people without money like Hazel just weren't able to. So Jackie Cochran saw herself in Hazel. And also, Hazel had a letter from General Kai-shek in China, his wife, Madame Kai-shek, about the combat, and Hazel being one of the best flyers from this country that came over. There were 200 total, and Hazel was at the top. So she had that letter that was very impressive because she didn't have a college degree, and Jackie preferred that. But Jackie was not taking African-American women at that time. So taking Hazel on as the first minority into the program had some risks. Jackie, and all of the risks were huge for Jackie. She could have lost what she was doing. She didn't have a lot of support for women flying. So taking Hazel on was risky, and it helped a lot that we were now allies with China. Had it been before the war, we were told to not like Chinese Americans. So Jackie took a chance on Hazel.
Big chance, and one that would pay off.
Yes.
Because Hazel, was she the band leader? Was she the morale booster for everyone else?
She was. And of course, she had so much experience being in China, seeing dogfights right overhead. I mean, she'd been underneath battles. How many of us can say that? None of the women had seen that. So she had that. She was a little bit older. She'd had a lot more flying experience. And then she had this larger than life personality, wicked sense of humor. She loved everyone and everyone loved her. So she was a big influence.
Yeah. I love being around those people. When you're afraid, and I'm sure a lot of the women were, then you turn to your side and you see someone like Hazel and you're like, well, look at her go. What an inspiration. She's getting up there every day or wanting to, or, if you're sweeping a broom, she's sweeping a broom right next to you. And if that's what's going to lead to getting back in that cockpit, I'll do it because Hazel's doing it. It's really neat to be able to say that you're not beneath anything or no one's better than anyone else. Everyone flies. And I'm really glad to have read. I'm so glad you included those champions, the people who fought for Hazel and the other women so that they had their opportunity. And now the sad part. when I read, and I hadn't, I mean, we all had known that this was not obviously a program that continued. It was the way in which it was shut down. And the way, when you think about those planes that sat there, and the people who were either not able to fly them or had to quickly get trained, when the women could have just jumped in. I mean, they would have done it without the militaries, um, being in the military, just civilian, they would have done it. And it's just a heartbreaking story. I can't imagine, what it had done to the WASPs who had forced to retire their spirit, and maybe part of why they didn't want to fly again, because when everything is new and aggressive and you've got that can do spirit, and you just get another new plane and you learn it quickly so you can fly it. And then what a joy it must be to tell the fella that you're delivering the plane to that the engine sticks a little on this side, and then check the rudder, because I mean, what an empowering moment. Not only can you fly it, but you're going to tell this fella how to fly it. I
Yes,
love that part. I'm going to be a little selfish here and be like, yes.
it feels good.
Well, sure, because it's like, I'm sorry, fella on the ground. This person just completed, across the nation flight. I think they know what they're talking about when they're breaking in a new plane. So pay attention.
And these women loved getting their hands into the engines. They'd write in their letters, "Oh, I got to get my hands into the engine today." So imagine flying up and, opening the engine and getting in there and saying, "Here's what's not working," and showing it to a man. They weren't just pilots. They knew everything about those planes. They knew them by the
Yeah.
sound of their engines in the sky. They would know what plane that is.
Yes. Yes. All those hours. And it was kind of part of the job, right? Required. It's like, you prove yourself above and beyond. Like they knew that that's what they were up against. But they truly had the curiosity and the desire to as well. It's like, what does this plane do? What does that plane do? I love when they first get introduced to the bombers. Can you walk us through that? Because I know Hazel wanted to go fast, and she did see some of the Fs and the Ps type planes. But when she got in the bombers, let's talk about those, because I bet they were overwhelmed.
Yes, it was an elite group of women of the WASPs. Not every WASP had that opportunity. I believe there were 100. There were 1,072 WASPs total. 100 of them were chosen to fly either a bomber or a fighter aircraft. You got to choose. And Hazel chose fighter aircraft because they went fast. She wanted to go fast. Some women chose the bomber, saying they liked the protection of it. They wanted, and they were giant. They said it was like taxiing a hotel down the runway. But the amazing thing about those first times is they weren't told what they were going to do. Jackie said, report to, I can't remember which airbase it was. And they
Yeah.
get standing in front of a B-17 thinking, ooh, do you think they're going to let us go inside? Do you think maybe we're going to actually, and then they were thinking, what if we got to ride? No, you're going to learn to fly it. And they did. But that was very controversial at the time. And they were never allowed. They almost made it. One couple women almost made it over. They wanted to use the women to take these B-17s over to Europe from this country. 400 crews were lost. The bombers were lost flying the snowball route over from our country to England. And they thought women could do that because the pilots that were taking them, it was mostly pilot error. They'd had a couple of months of training. And when they were in snow, they didn't know what to do. So these women were highly trained and could have done it, but they were women and they were not allowed to fly the B-17s.
Yeah. That story, you gave me chills just when you recreated it, that they look at a plane that big, then they desire to get in it, but then they get to fly it. You feel that. You feel that in the book. And just to be contradicting and play devil's advocate, which you do, and you present the facts, and there are some hard chapters as a woman reading where you're hearing from the archives that this is not your opinion, this is what was happening then, that the men wanted women to come home to. The men wanted women who were ready to be wives and make a family and welcome them back because they had these experiences, and they wanted like a reserve, right? They wanted someone that was going to be able to come home to if and whenever the war ended. And it was quite that, extensive. But when you read that and you're like, but there's women that want that. And then there's these pilots that are just ready to fly, and to be said no after all their training and all their hard work, and what they've been through. I want to talk about some of those stories. You had mentioned the snowball flight and how these women, some of them flying in open cockpits in the coldest of cold, and then training in Texas in the hottest of hots. Did any of the women talk about? I love the snake story as well. Can we talk about that?
The snake
It's
in the
so
room.
it's so brief, but it's so true to like I married a Texan and I
Oh,
lived in Texas for a while. So I'm from the north. And when I saw my first encounters with larger creatures, I'll just say that it is a freaky moment. So here's Hazel. Let's go ahead and set the stage.
and some of her roommates in that, there were 6 of them in the bunkmates, and one gal was from New York City, and one was up in a Saudi in North Dakota. I don't know if I think there was one, probably Madge knew what rattlesnakes were. But yeah, they were just in their room and something slithered out from under the bed and they all jumped up on the beds. And it was their first rattlesnake they'd seen. And Hazel, of course, gets a broom and jumping from bed to bed gets it out the door. I don't think they knew they were going to the rattlesnake capital of the world. That's what
Right.
Sweetwater, Texas is. But yeah, they had scorpions to do. They tucked their beds in so the scorpions wouldn't get into their beds too. Yeah, no air conditioning, very primitive. So much wind and heat that the ground, the floors of their bunks would be dirt. They'd say
Yeah.
you could grow a crop in here today because everything would just blow in. And yeah, it was primitive.
I love it. And yet nothing deflated their spirit to
No,
fly. They're like, we'll do whatever it takes. I love also the story of when they go to the like five and dime store to get like their soap, and they get the perfume and all the rations that they wouldn't otherwise find on base, and how the women in town that owned the place, the store, if you will, just welcome seeing them. And again, another like hidden champion in the background, saying, ladies, please help yourselves, because
yes.
it must have been so prideful. I know I saw two parts of the story. You did such a great job, Susan, of painting like both the people that embraced Hazel and the women, and then the people who, when she came into town or landed her plane in a cornfield, or, and they're like, what now? No, wait, you're the pilot? Wait, you're a woman. Wait, what? I bet this was right. It was, there was a couple times where Hazel was in her gear, and did I remember correctly, she had to change into fatigues for that exact reason? Because she was like, if I weren't in my clothes, they wouldn't believe me.
Yes, yes, because she wasn't in uniform. They didn't have uniforms yet, but she was in her zoot suit, the all in one, and she did have her name on it. But she didn't want to get close to the farmer with the pitchfork because she thought he was going to kill her. So she was trying to show him because he said, "You're a Japanese gal. The Japanese have landed when she crashed in his field," and she had to prove. And she was yelling at him, "If you'll call Avenger Field, they'll tell you who I am." But yeah, her name tag helped save her. That it had the United States flag on it, and she actually was not Japanese or a man. I mean, the farmer just really couldn't. It took him a lot of time, in the scene to really, and he's with his wife, and they're just going to kill her. Really, basically, he's chasing her around the plane with a pitchfork. He isn't going to take her as a hostage.
And
Yeah.
Hazel probably like, I'm not scared. I fly planes through battles. Why would I be scared? But landing there, she's more scared of landing than flying.
She's yelling at him over her shoulder, and yeah, I'm an American. He said American women don't fly in the Air Force or whatever. Yeah, yeah, and that was probably one of her scariest moments, and she did write about it. So having
Where
that
were you
story,
when you found that story? Did you laugh out loud like we enjoyed it?
and the language she uses about them, like "Dad gummit, I wish I would have checked the weather report" or something, because she got blown off course during a storm and ended up crashing. But just so funny. She was funny about it. I'm sure she was scared, but ended up staying for 3 days at their house. And I don't know if you remember, and they just kept giving her eggs, eggs and eggs, and she gets back to base, and I don't think I'll have any eggs, thanks. But she turned everything into something light and funny. And I know that made the women feel better. It emboldened them.
Yeah.
If Hazel
Yes.
crash and she's Asian American and survive that with humor
Right.
and grace.
Totally. And, she keeps proving over and over that she's a hero, but she's humble. I mean, when she first starts the program, she had this, experience in China, and I'm sure all the other women, and being older, they were probably like looking up to her and being like, wow, you are. And it's not like she had to prove to the other women, they were all, eager pilots, but she already about her coming in to the program that was just already probably that aura and be like, she's amazing. And she kept proving it over and over. She gets shot down. She crashes and survives. And then again with the farmer. And I can only imagine that when the girls were around her, that fearlessness, that bravery probably soaked in and inspired.
Mhm. It definitely did. They all wrote about that. I mean, I cannot tell you
So
how many
cool.
women write accounts of her and what she meant to them. And, even just little things like having their first Chinese food and seeing her discriminated against as they've been discriminated against as women and hugely in this program, what they were experiencing. And then here comes someone who's also Asian American. And there's the little subtle things that nobody even talks about, like they're going to classes every day with cadets. I mean, there was romance going on all over the place. Well, not for Hazel, because in this wouldn't even be talked about. A man wouldn't date an Asian American woman. It just wasn't done. So there's all that too going on. And they
Yeah.
saw that.
Yes, lots. And if Hazel were here today, what do you think she would want us to know?
Go for it. Go for your dream and don't let anything stop you. Don't listen to them. You don't have to be violent to do that. She just kept plowing ahead with grace and her sense of humor. And I'm just going to keep pushing and pushing and never, ever give up. Her persistence, she would definitely encourage people to persist, even when it looks like it's never going to happen. That's her biggest thing, I think. And she knew this. She never gave up. She never stopped trying until her death.
Yeah, absolutely, which is also unbelievable to have that kind of a crash after all those hours and hours and hours in the air where it seemed like it would be the most unsafe place. It was once again actually closest to the ground where the most risk came for her in her life, ultimately causing this. But such chaos on that day, and the way you presented it really came across. The so many planes trying to land, so many radios going at once. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. Everyone kind of coming in at the same time, trying to beat the storm. It was such chaos. And so for a very experienced pilot like Hazel, this was routine and she could fly in any storm and land any plane. But not the case for another pilot who probably maybe will we ever know who was in the right place at the right time, who was communicated with how? It's something maybe we'll never know.
Yeah, definitely not for sure, but it certainly sounded like the other pilot was at fault and it was covered up because he was protected because he was a man. Now, he didn't do it intentionally,
Sure,
but
sure.
it was a mistake on his part. I mean, yes, the chaos contributed to it, but he didn't have a working radio. So there's a lot of other things he could have done. He couldn't get it fixed at the gas stop before. That wasn't his fault necessarily, but he could have not gone on. He could have waited because they were all coming in. There were all of these P-62s being delivered to Montana. And because of the weather, they got separated. So they all didn't come in together. And so some waited as long as a week in a town, they'd get snowed in. So he could have waited until his radio could have been fixed. And then when he was landing, they were all circling like bees, they said, trying to get in. And he could have waited. I mean, could have, woulda, shoulda, it was an accident, but he was completely released of any responsibility. And the wasps who were standing on the flight line watching it happen, who saw it right in front of their eyes, were never interviewed or questioned for the official report by the government.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what the official report showed. I'm sorry, I don't recall, but it didn't necessarily say he was at fault, but it also didn't finish the rest of the investigation properly with the witnesses who happened to be the other wasps. My goodness.
Right. And they were suggesting that she pulled up into him. And the wasps who were standing on the flight line were like, it was completely obvious that he had come down. He didn't see her there. It was not an intentional accident. He didn't see her because he didn't have a radio. And all of the communications were garbled because so many planes were trying to land at once. And, there was fault also with the radio, the control tower, and it was Thanksgiving. And so there weren't as many people on duty. I mean, it was just a perfect storm.
Yeah. Did you cry? I cried reading it, but when you got the final parts.
Well, writing it every day while I was writing that scene, I'd get up and walk, and I'd just be like going through her death with her and just like, oh, shoot. And I'd be kind of angry, and I'd just be so disappointed that it happened that way and that she suffered. It was very difficult to write.
Yeah.
Those were exhausting days and weeks of writing that scene.
I can't imagine, Susan, for you. And it's not just Hazel. A lot of women perished in the hopes that they would land safely or get to their destination or deliver that plane. And for all the reasons, being off course, being an unfamiliar, plane for maybe the first only time. And we remember you properly acknowledge them. And I'm really grateful that there is this museum. I had not heard of it prior to the book. I'm so glad that it's there. And the site where people can find out more about the wasps. I'll put all this in the show notes. Let's tie a bow around American Fly Girl before I ask you about your other book. What is it that you wish, for those who are going to pick up the book or have not yet heard this story, what is the one thing you wish you can express that they take with from Hazel's story?
Well, it's a very empowering story for women, but men are also discriminated against based on their sex and what they want to do. So I just think the idea that you can or can't do something based on your gender or your race, she gives us a very powerful lesson that why were women not allowed to fly combat at that time when they wanted to? I mean, that even challenged me a little bit when I was writing it, thinking, oh, I had to think about my own thoughts about that because I just accepted what everybody accepts. Women don't and didn't until the 90s. And even then it was kept secret because it was felt that Americans couldn't handle that women were flying in combat. It's not like someone was making them. They were choosing that. So
Yes.
I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And I think that's a lesson that came out of this story, and that Hazel brought that to us. And of course, the WASPs laid the groundwork for women being in the military. It took much longer than it probably should have, but it did happen, and they were there first.
And you went to her resting site.
Oh, yes.
What was that like?
Again, very sad. And of course, I talked to her because that's who I am. I talked to her a lot, actually, when I was writing the book. But I felt so heartbroken. And, here you are, and this incredible story you've given to us, and such a short life, thinking about all the things that she would have gone on to do. The print she would have made on history is enormous, and she already had plans to do that. So heartbreaking. I haven't been back in a while. It's that difficult for me to go up there. It's very close to my house. And
well, it makes it real. I mean, you see the letters and you have the records, and there's a lot there to unpack that is very real, the archives. But until that moment, and it's there at the end of the book, and I don't mean to spoil alert, but you went there, and what an experience. I can only imagine, because it really does make it very real that she's no longer able to fly. And that in and of itself is just heartbreaking, yet alone that she perished.
after
What
all
is
she
amazing. After everything, she worked so hard. And, but that spirit, you've captured it. Susan, it's in the book. I mean, this book is in my library. I actually bought two. Our reading club is going to go to it next. So I hope everyone enjoys this story as much as I did. And thank you for writing it. Was the first book the inspiration for you to pick up Hazel's, or is aviation always been part of your journey and writing style?
Aviation has always been a love of mine, having been raised by a bombardier who talked all the time about, well, we both loved B-17s. I mean, that is just a beautiful plane. To me, it's, and one of the WASPs said this, it's not a machine, it's a human life. I mean, it's like a person. And my dad was very much that way about the B-17. And of course, when you fly in it in battle, it's also becomes like a godlike presence of protecting you, the flying fortress. I mean, that's where they were safe sometimes and sometimes not. Dad was shot down. But my love of aviation comes from my father. He wanted to be a pilot all his life and was not able to because of actually what happened to him when he was shot down in France. And so he wasn't handicapped, but he was unable to fly a plane. And I have flown in a B-17, and I was able to sit in the nose in the bombardier's chair. Oh, it was experience of a lifetime.
When was that?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you based on, I flew in the 909, which crashed, was it 2022? So I must have flown about 2020 because obviously it was before the plane crashed, and several people were killed, including the pilot. The pilot that had flown me in the B-17 was then killed over on the East Coast.
Oh my gosh.
The plane is gone, and it's such a loss. But he was an incredible pilot too. I mean, they did not find out. They're old airplanes, and things happen, but they're beautiful. And to fly in one gives you a whole different feeling of World War II. Like, how did they do? I mean, the smell is overwhelming. It's very rattly. It sounds like it's breaking apart like nails in a can. I don't know how they did it. And I've always said to my dad too, I can imagine getting in the B-17 for the first mission. How did you ever get in it the second time?
Right. Yes.
They're all, here we go to fight God's wars, gladiators, and to come back and see what they saw if they survived that first mission in it again. I don't know. So I grew up with lots of World War II stories.
And you got to fly. I'll never forget the moment I was at a air show. Here in the Midwest, we have one called Oshkosh, and it's the EAA, Experimental Aviation Association, where they host, and it's a huge fly-in here in Wisconsin. And they did a World War II reenactment. They are all over the country, I realize. But when that, first they do the fast planes, and they do the the fake shooting and they, inversions and everything and turns and twists. And you are watching this as the audience in the theater of the floor of the ground, and it is like you are on the edge of your seat. It's usually hot, sweaty, sunny, and you're just like, but you can't move because you're just taking it all in. And it's amazing to see these planes maneuver that way and go all these directions at once. And then unexpectedly, and they wait, they don't announce it, you see the bombardier come into view and start flying in, and everyone just, you can see the jaws drop open. You can hear the gasp because it's time to pay the piper, because here comes bombardier. And if you're so lucky that you're at such an exquisite air show, they have like a faux, explosive scenario on the ground where the bombs are dropped, and then do, 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 and they go off, on the airstrip way out in the distance. And then you feel the heat of that come across and over you from just a couple of bombs dropped. And you're like, and you leave, and World War II comes out of those history books in front of you in the air, and it never leaves you. And whether you're an aviation fan, whether you're a World War II buff, there's something about when that bomber comes that just holds you in that moment. And I can't even imagine in both ways. I can't imagine the bomber coming in that low, sometimes not, sometimes remaining very high, but also the people on the ground seeing it and having that experience. And so everything about that, what a moment to have that experience. And the way you captured it in your book, and I apologize for the audience listening. Now we've transitioned to The Girl and the Bombardier, the true life story of your father, Dean, who had an amazing journey, much of which you didn't know until you found everything after his passing.
Right. Well, I was kind of stupid in some ways because he talked about it all the time and I listened and I knew it, but I didn't ask the questions I wish I would have asked. I didn't get all of the details. And I know the shot down story better than any story in my life, but there were so many other pieces. And because when he was shot down and landed so hard, he was in shock, he didn't actually know some of the things, or he even was incorrect about a couple of facts. And when I went to France and I was able to meet everyone that hid him, and they took me to all of the homes and caves and places he was hidden along the way, that's when I got all these pieces they knew. And they were now in their 70s and early 80s, and they remembered like it was yesterday. And in some of the places, this is northern France, some of the homes really weren't changed very much from when Dad had stayed there. And one had the door of his airplane hanging up in his barn. I mean, it just was, after flying into B-17, I mean, those two experiences were the biggest of my life, the most amazing thing. How lucky was I? And I traced his path across France to the beach where he was rescued.
Amazing. This story. Okay. I can't pick a favorite because they have pierced my heart in so separately profound ways. So I can't see enough. If you're listening and you need an incredibly true story that will inspire you, pick either one. The Girl in the Bombardier about Susan's father, Dean, or the wonderful story about Hazel Lee and American Fly Girl. Both, I mean, I'm telling you, Susan, I devoured Hazel's story, but I needed a moment. I'm not going to lie. I needed a moment to just sit with her and sit with just her presence, her profound accolades and everything she accomplished, knowing what she was up against and where we are today. And even me knowing the story of like the Mercury 13 and some women like Wally Funk, who finally got to fly in her, famous just last summer or 2 summers ago. This was just a couple summers ago, where Wally Funk, who's, an astronaut in training in the original Mercury 13, finally gets to go into space after all these many years. So here we are still fighting the fights, right? And then I pick up, and because I'm so moved by your writing, I'm like, well, I have to read everything you write. So The Girl in the Bombardier had to sit with me, and I had to kind of take my time because I'm in my mind playing out these dark moments where your dad is in hiding and these families that are risking it all for him and the other fellas to just survive. Some don't, just both families and pilots. So when you found all of these things and you had already known the story, was your dad keeping them from you, or were they just found?
Dad, I tried always to get Dad to write his story chronologically. And he'd,
Okay.
Wander into his den and work on it and wander out. He just was a person that didn't live in the past, even though he liked to tell what had happened to him. And he'd often cry when he told it. He just didn't want to stay there. But these people wrote letters to him. And I knew that. I knew them. I knew their names. But I didn't think much about it. And when he died, he'd saved everything. He had every letter that they had written to him over the years. The last one was maybe 4 or 5 years before he passed away was written. So I thought, what if these people are still there? What if I can find them? And I did, based on that. But I knew, and I knew he had written a lot of the story. But when he died, I thought, oh, shoot, he didn't finish it, and I have to. I mean, I absolutely have to, whether I like it or not. And it ended up being a life-changing thing to do. So,
And it took you 10 years?
yes,
Oh,
yes.
We have to have you back on the podcast because we have to unpack this book as well and the journey that you have been on with these two amazing aviators. But I want to stay focused on you because your gifts and your writing style and everything is why we're here, and how you've inspired so many to read this. And thank goodness for you sharing this story. It is not easy to be the storyteller, to put yourself to gather all the research and data and pieces and things that don't puzzle pieces that don't necessarily come together or make sense. And
Yes.
it becomes your job to do exactly that. So I want to ask you, how did you come into that? Were you always a researcher? Was this a talent you discovered you had? Have you always been a writer in school? How did you discover that this would be something that you knew you could do and step into?
Well, I think the problem was I didn't ever think it was something I could do. So I did everything else. I wanted to be a writer from the time I was, excuse me, about 10. And, I
Oh,
remember I wrote a chapter book. It was short, but I really wanted to write. And I went to college and studied writing and just got very bogged down in journalism, in the research aspect of that. So I went into education and became a teacher and did not write. I was always saying I would, I'll write something. And I had a lot of starts of things, but it wasn't until my dad passed away. And I knew that that I was the only one who knew the story. And I was the only one who knew the story of these French people. Their children didn't know what their parents had sacrificed. It was so hush hush, to protect them. So
like
I knew,
Hazel's family too. It's hard to
right.
talk about, I bet. Yeah.
Right. That surprised me. And thank you for recognizing how difficult it is, because when you write these stories, you want to get it right. I mean, I don't know if people understand how painstakingly authors try to write the truth without their bias and to get it right, to do something that person would be proud of and is accurate and honest and authentic. It's very difficult to do.
I would love to hear more about this, like the conversations that they had between the families, even with the
Mm.
language barrier often. So when we have some of those dialogues in the book, maybe both books, are you taking that from what was shared and said with you, or is it captured somewhere?
Yes, it's in letters.
Wow.
You just cannot imagine the quantity of letters I have, even from like the parents. He stayed on a farm and there was a big family. And the parents wrote, my dad's parents afterwards, and explained all of these scenes that took place, like the night that my dad said it's time to go to bed and, always correct. And the way they're written, also, I was able to pick that up and use it in my writing, using their words directly from their letters so that it sounded like them. I mean, what a gift letters are. But
Yeah.
also for my dad's part and the dialogue, I could have written his words word for word in my sleep. He told it so many times, and anyone who came to our house heard the story. So I pretty much word for word could tell you
Wow.
how he told it. And then
You
meeting,
remember the dialogue
yeah.
between him and wow.
Oh, well, you hear it enough. And then also meeting the people in France, they were able to, tell me scenes and who said what. And it was a huge thing that most humans don't ever experience, thank God. And it's burned in their memories, how
Well,
something went down.
oh, well, we don't have aviation doesn't look like this anymore. We don't have wars like this anymore. Um, I teach as well, and students don't even, I teach public speaking often. It's one of the courses, and I'll put on for our persuasive speech the movie based speech that Patton gives delivering to the troop to kind of get them ready for war. And the students are like, who's Patton? And I'm just like, war, there's history isn't taught. So we don't write letters the way we used to. We don't have aviation the way we used to. We don't have wars with the ground and air strategies the way we used to. Very tangible, very in your backyard. Wars are now overseas or over there, out of sight, out of mind. So this just isn't in our worldview anymore. And to read it and recapture it in the book and to hear that your father remembered every dialogue, every word What, I mean, this is just such a beautiful gift that you've given us to continue his story. And I want to, before we wrap up, I really want, again, to let everyone know The Girl in the Bombardier, book one, Hazel's story, The American Fly Girl, book two. And we're talking now with Susan, the author. Um, as you're writing it, there must have been days where you're like, I can't. So what made you continue?
Days and weeks, especially with Bombardier, because I didn't have a contract yet when I was writing Bombardier. So I would get up and walk away. And I know a lot of writers do this and just like, this is terrible. Nobody's going to want to read this, and come back and come back and come back. And I did that a lot with Bombardier. With Hazel, I had a contract before I started. So I had to finish, which is very motivating. And I had to finish that book in 8 months' time. So there was I didn't have the choice. I got up every morning, often 7 days a week, some days 12 hours a day, and worked on it. And it seemed impossible. But the nice thing about it is that I stayed in that story. I was so immersed all the time. It was the end of the pandemic. I wasn't traveling or doing fun things. I just did that. And I think it made the story, better in a way. I was always there. I was always immersed in what was going on, and I knew where we were going. So it was kind of fun to do. I don't know if I'd want to write a book that quickly again.
Oh, you enjoyed. Well, I mean, I feel like your father's story is as much his as yours, because there's a whole second part to this that I'm going to tease and invite you, if not heavily request, if I have to kidnap you to come back on the show. And please, because so many people are going to want to hear about The Girl in the Bombardier and your experience coming full circle of when you went back to France. And you alluded to that a little bit here today, talking with me. But what a journey to walk in the same footsteps and have some of those same encounters and meet the people and see your dad's wing in some barn. I can't imagine. Um, Will you come back and
I
share
would
that
love
with us?
to come back. Yes, you do
Oh,
not.
I'm so glad.
You don't have to kidnap me.
Okay, good. We'll do that. Well, whatever it takes. Um, because I'm invested in these books, and I see my son starting to read history, and they love these books, these somewhat historical fiction and some things that are taking liberties. But if that's what teaches kids, I'm all for it, because I feel like the kids today who sit and read, you can watch a documentary and it's pretty amazing. And I remember a few of those when I was growing up too. But when you read a book and you can put your own smells and sights and feelings and observations to it in your own way through the words that are coming off the page, I feel like it sticks with you better. And I feel like it's ingrained, and I have a deeper understanding of the WASPs and what World War II was about for these people who had the experience. And also, dare I say, a little bit more about you, Susan. So we'd love to learn more and talk some more. So please come back and join us.
I would love that, Beth. Thank you.
All right, it's a deal. Now, what is next on the horizon in the meantime?
Oh, I'm working so hard this week. I have it narrowed down to about 6 women. I mean, I'm looking for women's stories that haven't been told. And sometimes it's amazing. You think, oh, that person's story. For example, Willa Brown, who was the first African-American to earn a pilot's license in this country. Bessie Coleman had to go to France to get hers.
Right,
But
right.
there's very little. There's an old out of print self-published book about her. And she ran for Congress. She has this incredible life. 200 of her students at her school, the Coffee Aviation School, went on to become Tuskegee Airmen. It just seems like there would be a lot of information out there about her. And maybe there is. I'm just starting, but I haven't found.
Oh,
Yeah. And so that's kind of what I'm looking for, is women who, Hazel's story, she was mentioned in some books, but some of it actually was inaccurate. Her whole story had not been told or known. And that was so rewarding to be able to gather all that together.
oh, thank goodness for you, Susan, because working at NASA all those years, I never knew the story of the hidden figures of the women computers. It was right. It wasn't necessarily under my nose because I was at Johnson Space Center. They were at Langley. But you know,
Mhm.
these stories exist and they just have yet to be fully told. And I cannot wait for your next adventure and your next book. I'm honored to know you. I'm so grateful you're here with us sharing. We are going to talk all about The Girl in the Bombardier when you come back, because that in and of itself, it's just worthy of its own episode and your journey going back. So we'll book it and everyone can look forward to hearing that. Thank you for your time today, Susan.
Thank you, Beth. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you helping tell Hazel's story to more people.
If you enjoyed this episode, give it some stars by rating and reviewing it on your podcast platform. Embrace the space.